It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. We begin to bulletin with the latest developments in Syria. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdel-Ati and his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi have agreed that both nations should promote peace and negotiations to achieve stability in the Middle East. The two sides discussed regional and international issues with a focus on the Palestinian conflict. They also addressed Syria, where Egypt rejected Israeli violations of Syrian sovereignty. Both ministers emphasized the importance of strengthening cooperation, upholding the UN Charter, and reforming global institutions to better represent developing countries. President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen has stated that the Commission increased its humanitarian funding to more than 160 million euros. The European Commission has launched a humanitarian air bridge for Syria, delivering 50 tons of health supplies from Dubai to Adana, Turkey, and 46 tons of health, education, and shelter items from Denmark for UNICEF and World Health Organization. An additional 4 million euros has been mobilized, bringing total humanitarian support to 163 million euros in 2024. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric has said United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is deeply concerned about the recent and extensive violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Dujarric told reporters that the Secretary General is particularly concerned about the hundreds of Israeli airstrikes on multiple locations in Syria, stressing the urgent need to de-escalate violence on all fronts across the country.
All actions that would be inconsistent with the agreement and calls on the parties.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stated that partners in the region agreed on the need for a unified approach to advance many shared interests. On Thursday, Blinken met with Jordan's King Abdullah and Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi as President Joe Biden's outgoing administration advocates for an inclusive transition in Syria following the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad.
I've had many calls over the last...
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan have discussed the need for considered efforts to counter terrorism in Syria following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. The talks also focused on a critical aspect of establishing stability in Syria. Blinken, who met with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan late Thursday, also stated that there was broad agreement on what Turkey and the United States hope to see in Syria after Assad's fall.
We talked about how Turkey, how the United States,
More Syrian refugees have crossed from Lebanon to return home following the toppling of former President Bashar al-Assad's government. Those leaving Lebanon only need a stamp from the Lebanese General Security to cross into Syria. However, severe congestion at the Lebanese General Security Center delayed Syrians trying to enter Lebanon. According to testimonies from Syrians, Lebanese border guards were tightening restrictions on those entering Lebanon while facilitating departures. Israel has ordered troops to prepare to stay on Mount Hermon throughout the winter within a buffer zone that has existed for decades along the border with Syria. Israel has stated that its deployment to the buffer zone is temporary, but concerns have grown over what United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres described on Thursday as extensive violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, urging Israeli forces to withdraw from the buffer zone. For more analysis, we now move to Mark in our newsroom.
Thank you very much, Selma. So for more on the current situation in Syria, we are joined from Cairo by the managing editor of Al Ahram Egyptian newspaper, Ashraf Al-Ashri. Thank you very much for being here with us. Now, do you think the United States expects Israel's entry into the Syrian buffer zone to be temporary?
Good evening to you and all your viewers. Of course, there are fears, Arab, regional, and international, but the American Defense State Secretary said that there are assurances sent to the U.S. from Israel that there will be more room for consultations and for handling the local internal situation. The American secretary informed the Israeli side about the fluidity of the situation in Syria and that there should be more Israeli assurance of allowing the regional and international parties to help the new administration in Syria to overcome the current obstacles and establish a new government in a transitional period, starting a new era in Syria where the constitution will be drafted, and within 6 to 9 months. The Israeli side till this moment is provided with enough assurances, but there is uncertainty if Israel will stop at this limit, but still till now the reports say that Israel is inside Quneitra, and Israel is 235 kilometers inside the Syrian territories, and that's a hazardous situation, but still the Israeli side said that it will be holding the Jabal al-Sheikh area till winter. And there are Israeli troops stationed inside the Syrian territories after removing the buffer zone and going even close to the countryside of Damascus. Egypt has been warning against this situation by the Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati and other Arab and international parties. Even France is asking Israel to stop advancing and to exit from the parts Israel is taking from the Syrian territory. But probably Israel wants to make the situation permanent, as it happens in the Arab occupied territories. This will have great impact on the developments in the region and the evolution of situation in Syria. There is tension and some time of weary situation, but Israel might escalate more in order to drive more escalation from the other side.
And why do you think that the Israelis say that the Golan Heights are, and I quote, vital lands for Israelis?
I believe that there is an international resolution, including the disengagement agreement signed in Geneva in 1974 between US, Soviet Union at that time, and other parties that stipulate that there is a buffer zone between Israel and Syria, and Israel should be committed to that. But over the last 6 days since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Israel is not respecting that kind of commitment and not caring for the UN Charter or the international conventions. After eliminating Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah, Israel is keen to establish its new positions in Syria, as it did in Lebanon for some time and as it is doing in Gaza. And Israel wants more incursion inside Syria for many reasons. First, to eliminate the Syrian army and the capabilities of the Syrian army, and some 80% of the weaponry of the Syrian army is destroyed even in Latakia, Homs, and in Damascus, including the 4th Division, which is the strongest in the Syrian army. The second reason is to cut the road for the new government established by the HTS in order to cripple any return of Hezbollah to the region, and also to impose on the new administration some kind of repression and to practice some pressures on the new administration in Syria to give concessions and to go for some reconciliation with Israel. And this will have repercussions inside the Syrian situation. Maybe Israel wants to stay for years in the Syrian territories as it did since 1967 till now. That's why the international community and the Egyptian side is warning against this, saying that this will create more tension and will lead to more escalation in this critical situation and critical time of the period we have, and there should be more time given to the new administration to overcome the transitional area and to engage all the political parties in Syria to start a new Syria, a new democratic Syria, a new free Syria, as the Syrians want to say through their celebrations in all their governorates.
And Mr. Al-Ashri, can you tell us what were the key points that were discussed during Blinken's talks on Syria?
For sure, Blinken in Aqaba in Jordan, while meeting with the King of Jordan, and today meeting with Erdogan. In the press conferences, Blinken has said that there is some kind of agreement and harmony of opinions in the region about establishing a new phase in Syria. And maybe there is probably some American support and Arab support as well to the new administration in Syria in order to pave the way for a new era in Syria and to have no foreign intervention from Hezbollah, Iran, or Russia, so as to have a new administration in Syria that can provide a great deal of consensus with the U.S. so as U.S. can have some political presence in Syria other than the military presence of the U.S. in the northeast of Syria since 2015. And also the U.S. wants to get rid of all the armed factions inside the Syrian territories so as it would not be a cause for a war waged against Israel, because Blinken and the U.S. wants to preserve the security of Israel. There will be a meeting tomorrow in Aqaba of the Arab foreign ministers of Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and also the Secretary General of the Arab League. They will meet with the foreign ministers of Turkey, US, and EU, and to find ways for establishing the way for the Syrian new administration to start a new era and to allow the foreign and international bodies to help this new administration and not get the HTS to be siding with any political or religious party, and to engage all the political forces and all the political alliances in Syria into the ruling Syria in the upcoming phase, so as Syria would not be hijacked by an Islamic group to govern Syria. This is rejected by the international community and the regional powers, because this will build a state of conflict of sectarianism inside Syria, and this is the fear after the fall of Bashar al-Assad.
So, given that, how do you think the US views the current situation in the occupied Golan Heights?
I believe that the US till now sees that there has been no U.S. deterrence against Israel. Just 2 hours after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Israel rushed into the Golan Heights, and over the last Thursday and Friday, it has got into the Syrian territories by some 25 kilometers. It's now getting some 235 kilometers of the Syrian territories, including Qnews, and there is an Israeli positioning inside the Syrian territories. The advisor to national security, Jack Sullivan, who visited Israel yesterday, said that he hopes that the Israeli presence in the Golan and in the Syrian territories would be temporary. And the Israel promised that it will be temporary. But the Israeli defense minister today says that it is telling its troops to stay in Golan and Jabal al-Sheikh all winter. And this means that Israel has got some plans to continue and to position itself and to station itself inside the occupied Syrian territories occupied over the last 5 days. So this was not much a problem for the US so far, and many of the Arab and regional powers made statements and stuff like condemnations, but Israel didn't care about all these reactions because Israel wants to establish a status quo and ignore all these international positions. Maybe the Biden administration does not want to pressure Israel now because it wants to foresee some deal between Hamas and Israel, and probably because the Biden administration is leaving the White House, it does not want to be crippled in making a final gain by establishing a peace or a deal between Hamas and Israel and a ceasefire in Gaza, as Blinken says and as the advisor to national security of the U.S. says, to have some kind of a deal between Hamas and Israel, sponsored by the US and assisted by Qatar and Egypt. But apparently the temporary presence of Israel might be permanent, as the Israeli intention might seem to be. And there has been a divergence in positions between the United States and the other parties regarding pushing Israel outside the Syrian territories and respecting the disengagement of 1974.
Well, thank you very much, Ashraf Al-Ashri, the managing editor of Al-Ahram Egyptian newspaper. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's back to you, Selma.
Thank you so much, Mark, for conducting this interview. Leaders of the G7 are scheduled to meet in an effort to forge a unified approach to Syria's new government. The G7 meeting virtually expressed readiness to support Syria's transition to an inclusive and non-sectarian government. They called for the protection of human rights, including those of women and minorities, and emphasized holding the Assad regime accountable for its crimes, while pledging support for a Syrian government that upholds these principles. Deputy Executive Director of the UN World Food Programme, Karl Skau, has warned that Syria is facing the aftermath of a civil war, a rise in refugees from Lebanon, and the sudden removal of al-Assad. Skau stated that even before the current crisis, more than 3 million people in Syria faced acute food shortages, but the World Food Programme could only assist 2/3 due to funding cuts. While Aleppo remains calm and orderly, Skau highlighted ongoing uncertainty in Damascus, including disrupted markets, falling currency values, rising food prices, and inoperable transportation. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, has sent urgent supplies of war-wounded kits in response to the emergency situation in Syria. The ICRC said that the kits contain medical supplies needed to treat people injured by bullets, and that supplies have been delivered to the El Mawasat and El Mushtahid hospitals in Damascus, with more hospitals set to receive them soon. The ICRC also noted that Syria's already overstretched healthcare system requires additional support. The UN has stated that an estimated 1.1 million people have been displaced across Syria since fighting escalated on November 27. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said in its latest Syria situation report that the majority of the newly displaced are women and children. OCHA also reported that nearly 640,000 people fled Aleppo, 334,000 from Idlib, and 136,000 from Hama. In turn, 438,000 displaced people arrived in Idlib, 170,000 in Hama, and 123,000 in rural Damascus. Over 400,000 people are in shelters across northeastern Syria, receiving food and aid. Since the escalation, nearly 700,000 people in Aleppo, Idlib, Hims, and Hama have received food assistance. And now we move to the latest developments in Gaza. At least 35 Palestinians, including several children, have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on houses in the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. Medics said the strike hit a postal facility in Nusayrat camp where displaced families had sought refuge and also damaged several nearby houses. Earlier on Thursday, 2 Israeli airstrikes in southern Gaza killed 13 Palestinians, whom Gaza medics and Hamas identified as part of a force protecting humanitarian aid trucks. At least 3 Palestinians have been killed and several others injured in a series of Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Local reporters confirmed that Israeli occupation forces targeted civilians in the northern Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza, killing 1 and injuring 2. In a separate airstrike in southern Gaza City, 2 more Palestinians were killed. This follows a massacre on Thursday evening in Nusayrat, where 33 Palestinians were killed and dozens injured in an Israeli bombing of a residential building. Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has risen to over 44,875, with more than 106,454 wounded. A Palestinian man has been injured by live ammunition during an Israeli military raid on the city of Nablus in the northern occupied West Bank. Israeli occupation forces also stormed the eastern part of the city, including areas around the Balata and Askar refugee camps. Clashes broke out between the occupation military and local residents, during which soldiers fired live ammunition, sound bombs, and toxic tear gas. The United Nations General Assembly has overwhelmingly voted to call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, along with the immediate release of all detainees. The UN General Assembly adopted a resolution with 158 votes in favor, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and using stronger language than previous calls for a humanitarian truce. It also passed a second resolution with 159 votes in support of UNRWA, condemning a new Israeli law that would ban its operations in Israel. The resolution called on Israel to respect UNRWA's mandate and allow its work to continue without restrictions. The US, Israel, and 7 other countries voted against, with 11 abstentions. Saudi Arabia has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, where Israel's ongoing genocide have resulted in widespread violence for over 14 months. In a statement at a UN General Assembly session, Ambassador Abdulaziz Al-Wasil urged increased international support for UNRWA and called for global participation in the June 2025 conference in New York, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France, to resolve the Palestinian issue. A key parliamentary session in London has urged the British government to urgently grant medical visas to children from Gaza in need of treatment. The session called for immediate action to address the dire situation faced by Gaza's children amid the ongoing Israeli aggression on the Strip. It marked a pivotal moment in the campaign for Gaza's children, uniting various sectors to urge the British government to act swiftly. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said that he believes a deal on Gaza's ceasefire and detainee release may be near. Sullivan said he planned to travel to Qatar and Egypt, Washington's partners in moderating the talks, to advance efforts aimed at bringing detainees home. He added that these efforts would also facilitate a massive increase in humanitarian assistance. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Egypt and China call for Middle East peace, reject Israeli violations in Syria, and stress global cooperation. Israeli airstrike on Gaza's Nusayrat camp kills 35 Palestinians, including children. And UN General Assembly demands immediate, unconditional ceasefire and detainee release in Gaza. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNews EG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.
The amusement is in the journey. With experience and knowledge, you will discover and understand. We will explore the world together and live the adventure of finding news on Q News.
احنا الست بنات بنشتغل كخلية نحل مع بعض، هيك علاقتنا متشابكة مع بعض، بنشتغل زي السلسلة ورا بعض، كل واحد بيسلم لشغل الثاني، يعني وظيفة الأول بتسلم للثانية. الحمد لله كنا مرتاحين، فحاليا تغير الوضع، يعني الحين بدك تشتري حطب، الحطب كل ماله بيغلى سعره، الكيلو ب5 الكيلو ب6، طب كيف بدك تحمل فرن؟ الفرن بده أقل حاجة بده 5، الفرن كبير مش تبع فرن رغيف الدار زي ما بيحكوا 4 هذا، لا احنا جايبينه على كيف 8 من الخبز اللي بيحكوا عنه هذا البلدي، فايش حيكون حجم كبير. حاليا احنا الحين بننتج في الحرب بس البيتزا، الناس لما سمعوا كلمة بيتزا قالوا بدنا نشتري، شئتوا ام ابيتوا، يعني عن جد الواحد صار نفسه انه يشتري، عاد احنا البنات احنا اللي بنشتغل فيه صرنا ايش نسحب، يعني الواحد نفسه فيها من زمان طول النهار، يعني اكيد الناس كله اكلوا مع التكيات عشان ايش يتعبوش حالهم في الحطب، واكيد الناس تعبوا من الحطب. اكثر المعوقات اللي بنواجهها انه الميه بتكون شحيحه عنا، ولما يكون الطقس عنا عالي يعني درجه الشرب عاليه، فاحنا بنكون بوجه الفرن الطينه، فاكيد حيكون ياثر علينا.